This franchise has 12 movies altogether, including Freddy v. Jason, including the 2009 remake that people just love to hate so much. Why? Because, as I always say, horror film remakes generally get lower approval ratings than, the originals. I'm sure the same is of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and I'll get into those later once I do my reviews on them. Halloween, same thing. They haven't done any remakes of Scream yet, but I can sense they're going to do a remake in another, I don't know, 10 to 15 years, maybe closer to 20. I mean, I guess that kind of depends on where they take their story. Now, with the Friday the 13th franchise, with all the movies together, all 12 movies, the budget was almost $81 million, which is what it cost them to produce and market the movie. So that's overall. And their box office, worldwide box office for all 12 movies combined, is almost 470 million. Some pretty good numbers right there. Really good for a horror film. Really good for a horror franchise. Now, as I've stated before, I think that all the movies get a 9 or a 10. I guess I would give the Manhattan one like an 8, 8.5. The remake, I think, deserves a 9 because to me it was very almost equivalent to the first few original films, but again, it's been years and years. So you're talking the first film was 1980 and then this one was 2009. So you're talking 90, 10, so almost 30 years. I want to make sure I got that right. So 80, 90, 2000, yeah, that's 20. So yeah, so 29 years, almost 30. And, the images and the vision through the camera is obviously going to look better. I think the acting is going to be a lot better compared to 70s and 80s acting. But again, it's a different time. And that's kind of why I want to get into some of the reviews for each of the movies and the reviews from the Google users. Now, from the first movie, this person commented on the first movie and said, "This movie sucked. I decided to watch it on Friday the 13th for the very first time because I thought it's a classic. It has to be good. Boy, was I wrong." Actually, yeah, you are wrong because it didn't suck. It was great. But it was filled to the brim with terrible acting, terrible characters, a terrible plot, and overall very terrible choices for the characters. I was screaming at the TV during the entire final sequence. Boring, not even the slightest scary, and shouldn't be remembered this much. Okay, so let me just say a couple things about that. As far as the acting, I'll tell you what I did. When I first got into the horror slasher franchise and the whole horror slasher genre, the very first film, to this very day, I remember the very first one I watched was the Halloween remake from 2007, directed by Rob Zombie. And that got me into the Halloween series. And once I got hooked on that, then I started watching the Freddy and Scream and Jason and all the other stuff, Chucky and whatnot. So I look at the one from 2007 and I thought, man, this is really brutal. Like in terms of like what was going on in the plot and how people were getting killed and attacked and slashed up and whatnot. I mean, objects going through people's heads. The bully was killed in the forest, all that stuff. The people assaulted and killed in the hospital. I mean, it definitely was not a movie that anybody under, I want to say 18, 17 should be viewing. I think I was 14 or 15 when I watched it, and it was crazy. I looked at that movie, and then I decided to go back and watch the 1978 original. And I have to say, at that given time, I thought to myself, and part of me kind of still thinks like, wow, this is much cheesier and faker in comparison to what I just saw. But over time, you realize that depending on the time, there's only so many resources and so much technology and things that you have to work with. So obviously what we have, the technology and the resources we have today in 2023, what you had back in the 70s, 80s, 90s is nowhere near this. Not even close. So yeah, the acting would seem terrible in comparison to now, but I mean, again, Halloween was the only franchise I watched where I saw the remakes and then saw the originals. With everything else, I watched it in order. So that's why that kind of threw me off a bit. Would I have a different opinion if I watched the original first? Maybe. But I think the acting was okay, but again, it's a lot of movies today are better than a lot of movies from before, in my humble opinion. Terrible characters. I don't know if I agree with that one completely. I mean, I think the only really terrible character per se was Jason Voorhees because he was a serial killer slashing people up. A terrible plot. Okay, so the basic plot of that movie is that and by the way, I can say this, I don't really count this as a spoiler. The movie came out in 1980, so if you didn't see it by now, then oh well. It turns out that Jason Voorhees wasn't the killer in the first movie. The person that was the killer was his mother because she was seeking revenge against camp counselors who supposedly allowed him to die by drowning because they weren't paying attention to him when he was out in the water. They were in the barn house having sex and making out and whatnot. And so she decided to take matters into her own hands. Now, of course, one of the rules of slasher movies is the bad people, they never die. They always keep coming back. I mean, they die, but never, they just keep coming back. I mean, everything has happened. When you look at Michael Myers, when you look at Freddy Krueger, when you look at Jason Voorhees, all types of things have happened to them. They've been burned alive, came back, drowned, came back, stabbed, came back, shot, came back, hit with a car, dismembered, caught in an explosion. All those things have happened with them, and these guys still keep coming back. So it's meant to be part fantasy in a way. You don't even find out why anything is happening until the last 20 minutes. Yeah, because it's called building suspense and keeping the audience guessing at many different turns. So obviously they're not going to give away Act 3 and Act 1. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the movie, and that's the purpose of many movies, especially when it comes to mysterious, suspenseful thriller movies like this. Now, of course, with the first movie, we have Voices from the Balcony that only gave it a 22%. Internet Movie Database gave it a 64%. Rotten Tomatoes 66. And among Google users, we have 82 to 84. So, I mean, these are kind of all over the place. Now, one person who gave it a positive review said, "It baffles me to no end the number of people who will take some sort of perverse pleasure in attacking this movie. At this point in human history, it is less graphic and shocking than the average primetime network TV show. We've also all heard roughly 11 million times how it's just a knockoff of Halloween, a criticism particularly popular amongst those who don't like Halloween either, and how it's tame compared to contemporary horror films, and how Jason isn't even the killer in it, and the simple fact that Friday the 13th remains an effective, straightforward little thriller. It's a campfire tale brought to life, and it still works remarkably well in that regard. If it doesn't scare you, congratulations, you're really tough and cool and grown up, and all the other kids want to be just like you. If you find it lacking in the acting or writing departments, congratulations, you're an expert on the craft of cinema and probably deserve at least your own podcast. If not, a 3-picture deal from a major studio. If you still find it morally repugnant, misogynistic, and representative of the decline of Western civilization, congratulations, you're a Puritan living in at least a half century in the past and will likely get to heaven before all of us wicked sinners who keep insisting it's just a movie. Is Friday the 13th a great work of cinema? Perhaps not, but I've seen it more times than I can count and has never once failed to entertain me. What I do know is that it's had its detractors since day one, and many of those people have already left this mortal plane, yet Friday the 13th endures. So criticize all you like, folks, but there's a reason why this little slasher fic, of all the slashers that followed Halloween, remains the most popular film of its type ever made. The fact that you don't get it does not in any way whatsoever diminish that fact, and it never will. Wow, that was powerful. Good speech right there. That was something right there. Strong words and very well written. A lot of people will agree with it. I see 108 people liked it. They found it helpful. And I'm sure there's a lot who disagree. And then, of course, we still have a huge portion of the society in the country that doesn't watch any of these movies, period, because they don't like, horror and slasher, because they don't like being scared and heart racing and seeing images of people getting cut up and killed and whatnot. I get that. That might be too much for some people to handle. So if you're that person, then no, I wouldn't say that this movie's for you. Or like any of these movies, Jason, Freddy, Scream, Halloween, Chucky, none of these are for you if that's how you feel. That's okay. Iconic slasher film that paved the way for many slasher movies to come in the future. Though the main plot and story was mostly implied through the teen, sex, nudity, and slasher mentality of these films, the deep history of the story and disturbing nature of who and why about Jason Voorhees adds to the addicting curiosity behind his dark and demented past. The special effects for the time, along with the gore, caught the attention of many horror fans, and the variants in which he killed his prey, along with using different weapons, different weapons kept things mixed up, even though you knew everyone would indeed die. The fact that Jason Voorhees has the most film kills out of any other horror slasher villain keeps me a huge fan of someone that knows what he's doing and does it well. Iconic movie franchise. Being a fan of the franchise, my most favorite one is to look back at the first time created in the series. I enjoyed most of the film. It was cool to see Kevin Bacon perform and see other celebrities that made the movie a lot better. However, there are some things I found annoying about the movie. Let's start with the story arc. It was really hard to follow along with the many premarital sex and gore scenes in the movie. Don't get me wrong, I loved how realistic it looked, but it kind of messed up on where the story was going. Now let's go to all the deaths that were cut away. Now I understand they had to do this to keep the movie from X ratings. The movie was dang near rated X. You might as well have given that, but no. But that doesn't change the fact that it's completely annoying, which is why I give Friday the 13th a rating of 3.5 out of 5, which is 35 out of 50, which is 70 out of 100, so 70%. And that was the first movie. So now looking at the second one. Matter of fact, because that was long right there, I'll kind of make some of the other ones shorter. Now, again, I think that and I got to be honest with you, I watched these movies a long time ago, and because I'm so used to watching horror films that are post-2010, I was kind of in the mindset that if I go back to 1978, 1980, 81, 84 to look at these original films, I kind of thought, you know what? I may not enjoy it as much now because back then it's cheesy, but I've looked at it, I enjoyed it just as much. So I agree with what the other person said. I think it is a masterpiece in the genre of horror slasher. With 1982, so this was part 2. This one got Rotten Tomatoes, Common Sense Media gave it 32 and 40%. Internet Movie Database 61, Google users 80 to 86. Epic, perfect flow. Throughout the runtime, there's so much to take in that it's never boring or slow. Agreed. I don't see any 1 stars on this movie or 2 stars. 3 stars. 5 years after the events of the first movie, Camp Crystal Lake has been quietly and defunct. Quietly and defunct. Okay, I don't know what that's. I was trying to understand the gist of that, but apparently that was going nowhere. Part 3. Same ratings. Whoa, wait, hold on a second. I'm seeing something right here. Hold on. This is all over the place here. Internet Movie Database gave it a 56%. Rotten Tomatoes, a 7%. Google users, 87%. 70 to 87% on Google users. This movie can be really broken down into 3 parts as it gets better as it goes on. The first part is really slow and boring, introducing very uninteresting characters and setting up the same basic plot from the previous movie. It always made me curious to know, why did people think that certain characters were uninteresting? Because with each movie, you have an almost entirely different set of characters, because 95 to 99 to 100% of characters in the other films get killed off. You had Alice Hardy, who lasted 2 or 3 movies, just like you had Nancy Thompson that lasted throughout most of the Freddy movies. Sidney Prescott, the first 5 Scream movies. I mean, she survived all 6 movies, but she just wasn't present in the 6th one. She hasn't been killed off yet. Laurie Strode, who's essentially survived all the Halloween movies. Rotten Tomatoes only gave that one a 7%. Google users gave it an 87%. Rotten Tomatoes, 24%. Google users, 80%. See, Google users are so much nicer to these movies than Rotten Tomatoes ever has been. The 5th movie, Rotten Tomatoes gave it an 18%. Google users, 78%. I'm just going to hit part 6 right here. Let me just guess. Rotten Tomatoes, you probably gave it a 20 to 25% on part 6. Let's just see what you did here. Oh, 50%. Much higher than I thought. Way, way higher than I thought. At least 30 percentage numbers higher than what I thought. At least that. Now, I'm curious to know what people thought about. Of course, we went over some of the ones with the Jason Lives. I've mentioned that before, and I've said I thought that was good. The Jason Goes to Hell was great. The Manhattan one was mostly good. It was all right. Again, like 8.5. Jason X, about an 8.5, maybe a 9. Here's where Jason X is at. Rotten Tomatoes, 19%. Shocker. Internet Movie Database, 44%. Google users, 72 to 75%. Now, I'm curious to know what the negative ones are on this. This installment was this is Jason X. This installment was an utter nonsense. It damaged the already partial damaged franchise. The story was nonsense. The screenplay was nonsense. The performances couldn't have been more bad. The direction was disgusting. The special effects were as bad as they could be, and the whole movie was so boring. Friday the 13th franchise should have ended with part 4, only as every installment afterwards damaged this once iconic franchise. Thank God this one was the last installment. Overall, I would never recommend this piece of nonsense to anyone, not even to the fans of Friday the 13th franchise. Actually, it wasn't the last one in the franchise. I mean, it was the last one before the remake, but, I mean, overall, no. And that's why Jason Blum and, what's his name, Turek, are possibly talking about, maybe doing another film, which I will be in theaters for if they actually come through with that. Now, it's possible that it may not be released in theaters. If they go through with it, it might just go to streaming. I can see it going to Max or Peacock, in which case I'll be there for it too, because I have 10 or 11 different streaming services. It's going to be on one of them. This movie was the worst movie. The acting was terrible. The plot was terrible. The whole movie barely made much sense. Like how he went from Crystal Lake to legit outer space. I hated this movie so much, I would rate it a literal 1, only because I really like this Jason and how he was designed in this movie. The kills were cheesy and it was just not good overall. The movie was such a waste of time. Do better. Now let's see what the positive said on that. Indestructible hockey mask wearing killer Jason Voorhees is back and in one of the most entertaining horror films ever. It's fair to say it's space sci-fi premise. This movie is definitely an anomaly in the Friday the 13th franchise. Yeah. When Jason Voorhees is captured and frozen using cryogenics, he remains dormant for hundreds of years. That is until he is thawed out and awakens on board a spacecraft in the far future. Whilst not to everyone's taste, the movie at least attempts to do something different, and the change works. Jason himself seems reinvigorated, the special effects are terrific, and the kills inventive and fun. This movie is a real guilty pleasure and just a truly fun and enjoyable romp. Okay, let me comment on this part right here. The movie attempts to do something different and the change works. That goes back to what there's a little bit of commentary in Scream 5. Jasmine Savoy Brown's character Mindy goes on a rant about movies, about what is a requel, and talks about remakes, sequels, reboots. And in there, she said that it's impossible to please fans. That's what she meant when she said, you do something new, but not too new, or else the internet goes absolutely insane, absolutely crazy. Well, movies like this prove just that. And they've also, even like I talked about before, with even some of the action films, when you look at the Fast and Furious, everybody thought that the first movie was great. The first couple movies were great, like the first 3 or 4 films, which I agree with. I'm a Fast and Furious fan. Then you get to 8, 9, 10. Oh, it sucks, because it's totally different, because they took it away from street racing and now they're, like basically borderline superheroes and being spy agents or whatever. Well, here's my thing. I get how somebody can be upset when you take a movie franchise and you transform it over to something else that doesn't match the originality, that doesn't match the origin of it. I get how people can be upset about that, but on the same token, it's like people have also complained that when movies have like 5, 6, 7 sequels and they just keep it the same, people will stop watching it and they'll complain and say, "Oh, it's boring." So it's like, what do you do? So I think that's what they were doing when they took Jason out of Crystal Lake and put him in Manhattan and then put him in outer space. I think they were just kind of testing the waters to see, well, what happens if he's still a serial killer, he's still a maniac, he's still undead, he still can't die. But what's going to happen if we take him out this setting right here? Let's put him somewhere else. And I think this proves just that. So that's just kind of the gist of like good and bad comments with a lot of these movies. And overall, I would say if I have any types of criticisms of the franchise, it would usually be along the lines of, I do remember a scene in the remake where at the end there's like this there's this machine that's similar to like this chainsaw, like the buzzsaw thing, and they took the chain, wrapped it around his neck, and the chain was attached to that saw. But I thought it was actually going to cut his head, but that didn't happen. I figured that would probably look better for the movie. Of course, he still came back. That's what all these Jason movies do. You think he's dead, and he keeps coming back. That's why every time they keep saying, "He's dead, he's dead, he's dead." No, he's not. He died. No, he didn't. He was killed. No, he wasn't. He keeps coming back. They tie him up, throw him in the lake. He's underneath there for who knows how long. And at the end of the movie, he comes out, attacks the people. I mean, that's pretty much the gist of the Friday the 13th franchise. And that's really the gist. The other main thing of the franchise is this. He supposedly died when he was a boy, supposedly drowned at Crystal Lake. And as I stated earlier, his mother was the killer in the first movie because she was seeking revenge against the camp counselors who supposedly allowed him to die because they weren't paying attention to him because they were in the barnyard, making out, having sex, all that type of stuff. And she she does kill a number of people, but then she herself ends up getting killed at the end. Now, at the end of the first movie, beginning of the second movie, that's when Jason starts his killing spree to seek revenge against those who killed his mother. And guess what? Anybody who sets foot at Crystal Lake, they're doomed. They're going to die. So as of right now, all these movies are available to watch on Max. I'm sure some of them might be available on some other streaming in case you don't have Max. I suggest that you rent them on YouTube or Amazon if you're really a fan of the horror slasher franchise, which, of course, I'm pretty sure at least 95 to 99% of my horror slasher fans have already seen the movie. But by any chance, just in case you didn't, check them out. Friday the 13th is by far one of my favorite slasher horror franchises ever, and I hope it continues.